The differences to the view options in version 10 and version 11 are very minimal. So rather than create a whole new movie to explain how the view options work, I'm just going to do a little introductory movie here where we can have a look at where those controls differ, and it's basically the placement of them. That's the only difference. So over here I've got version 11, and if I click on a wall, the wall default settings pops up. Now over here, this is the version 10. We can see the Virtual Tutor 10 view options dialog there. So the floor plan display and show projection is under the floor plan section, but it's outside this main dialog box. On version 11, under floor plan section, so the same spot, but it's been placed inside the dialog box. So the show on all stories, floor plan display, we can see that showing all the stories, and then we've got all our options there, and the cut only, projected, and entire element show projection, on show projection, show projection. So that's the only difference between version 10 and version 11. So having said that, that's the introductory piece. Let's get into the movie. With the introduction of multi-story elements and slanting and double slanting walls, Graphisoft needed to introduce a way to correctly display these elements on the floor plan with enough options to please everyone. So what they did, they introduced a variable cutting plane and a way to display the vertical range of elements on the floor plan. The architectural interpretation of the model is now even more flexible and intelligent than previously before. Here is an example of a wall, a double slanted wall that I've created on the floor plan. If I close that, we can see at the moment this wall's display option is selected as projected. I also have a solid fill to designate the cut of that. And as far as cut planes go, if I select this here and go to design, if I go to document, floor cut plane, I've also included a cut plane button here, so in the future I can just get to that quickly. At the moment this cut plane is 900. As we can see, the orange area is quite large. If I move this up to say 1500 and say OK, the cut plane has now moved up in this story, so the display has now been modified. If I select that and change that to just cut only and do the same thing, we can see the wall will appear to get thinner as we get to the narrow part up the wall. So I might just put that back to 1150, which is what it is set at by default. We can also define the relative floor plan range. This means that previously we could only display elements on their home story and limited to their vertical range on the floor that the element was sitting on. Now we can limit elements display relative to their home floor, plus or minus an offset. We can also extend their range to include floors above or set an absolute display limit. This can be Project 0 or two other custom set reference levels. We're just going to take a look at a couple of other examples now. In this example we have 5 columns that are identical, but their display options are different. If I select the first column, we can see that straight away the whole column is being selected. These columns are all at 3 meters high and they are all at 45-degree angles. If we open the settings, we can see that it's set on projected, which if you see the icon, it shows a little red line through the cut plane, which is defined in the cut plane that we just talked about, and it displays the rest of it underneath that. So from the cut plane at 1150, showing straight through the column and the rest of the projected column down. The next option, if we open up, shows projected with overhead. Now the funny thing here is that on top of this little icon it shows a little dotted line, whereas other than that it looks similar to the first icon. So in actual fact we can define the rest of the projected column above the cut plane by going to the outlines, checking that and making it dashed. So if I push OK, now we can see that the projected part of it above the cut line is now in outlines. This third option is cut only, and that's fairly obvious. We can just see just through the cut. So if we select the fourth column and open its settings, here we can see we're on outlines only. Here it's like we are displaying on the floor plan the entire column as if we're looking at it from ceiling height, so the whole lot is in solid lines. Finally, we have the last column, which states its overhead or as its floor plan display option. Over here it displays the entire column as if it was reflected from the floor. I've got a couple more examples on the side here. In this next example, I have created 5 walls that are exactly the same. They all have a big long window going through it, and the wall is a multi-story element. They are 3 stories high, and if I go to the story settings, we can see that they're 3 meters between each story, which means the overall height of the wall is 9 meters. So if I push OK and we go to our cut plane, we can see the cut plane is still at 1150. Once back on our floor plan, I have my 5 walls set up, and I've actually copy and pasted the cross section of these walls back onto the floor plan, and I've got some lines designating where those stories intersect on the floor plan. These walls are all multi-story elements, so they're all 9 meters high and they start at 0. This 0 is our project 0, and if I select the first wall, we can see that it's projected. So if I open it up, we can see it's projected and I'm showing the entire element. So I push OK. What this gives us is our cut plane at 1150 and a solid back down to our project 0. Next, we've got projected with overhead, and that's giving us our cut plane solid down to our project 0 and dashed up until at the top of the wall, which is at 9 meters. Now this dashed line we've designated, we can make it anything we like. On the third one, we've got cut only. This cut only, as the name suggests, is just a cut through the 1150 cut plane. Next, we've got outlines only, and over here the outlines only doesn't give me the window, doesn't show me the window in it, but it shows us from project 0 all the way up to 9 meters. With outlines only, we don't have the entire element option because you don't have a choice, but it's showing me the whole wall from project 0 all the way through to 9 meters. This is also similar with my overhead all. No window is shown, and entire element option is not available because that's the only option. Push OK. Now as I toggle through the stories, now as I go to the second story, the display of all the different walls has stayed consistently the same. Now we're on the second story, we've got a cut plane at 1150 on the second story all the way down to project 0. Cut plane 1150, solid down to 0 and dashed to the top of the multi-story element. Cut plane only at 1150 on the second story, and of course these two options stay the same because they are always showing the entire element. So as I go to the third story, once again exactly the same. Cut plane at 1150 through the third floor down to project 0. Cut plane 1150, third floor, solid down to 0 and dashed to the top of the element, and then a cut plane for the third. So that's basically how the view options work when it's set to the entire element. In the next example, I've got the same 5 walls, the same cross section or elevation pasted to floor plan, but this time, seeing we've explored all the floor plan display options, now we're going to look at the show projection options. There are 3 options here, and at the moment, first we're going to look at the absolute display limit. The absolute display limit is basically down to project 0 in this instance. We can change that to first reference level or second reference level, but I'm going to leave it to project 0. From project 0 to the cutting plane on the floor that you're on. And these preferences can be set from options, project preferences, working units and levels, and project 0, first reference level and second reference levels. This can be set at anything you like. So for example, this has got from project 0 through to the cutting plane 1150 on that floor, and as I toggle up through the stories, from now we're at project 0 through the cutting plane on the second floor, then project 0 to the cutting plane on the third floor. The window has got the same option set. If I go back to the first story, over here we've got projected with overhead, and once again to absolute display. So this is going to show me from project 0 to the current story that you're on. So now we're on the second story. Now it's projecting from project 0 all the way up to the ceiling or the top of story 2, and then obviously the next one's going to be to the top of story 3 from project 0. This window is actually set at projected. Next we have this final, I'll go back to the floor plan. We've got the wall is at projected to absolute display, but the window has its own display option, and that's projected with overhead. So that's displaying all the way to the upper limits of the first floor, then to the upper limits of the second floor, and then obviously the third floor. And at the whole time we're still projecting from project 0. Now the last two options, which are these two here, over here this is saying to floor plan range. So if I go back to the cutting plane, the floor plan range is defined by the story above to the current story. Basically it's going to show you the section of the wall that's passing through the story that you're on at the moment. So at the moment we're on story 1, and it's going from project 0 to the top of story 1, and same with this. This is projected with overhead, and this is also projected with overhead, and they're both to floor plan range, but the only difference is the window. The window is projected with overhead in this wall, but on this one it's just cut plane only, or symbolic, which is the same thing. So now as I toggle up through the stories, we can see now that we're on the second story, we're going from story 0 on story 2 to at the 3 meter mark to the 6 meter mark, and the same thing's happening on that wall. Then finally 6 meter to 9 meters from the bottom of story 3 to the top of story 3, and that's projected with overhead to floor plan range. Windows also have various display options. In this wall we can see that it's projected with overhead and entire element. I've got 4 copies of the same wall and 4 copies of the same window. Now we're just going to change their view properties. Now this one is set at symbolic. This is how previous versions of ArchiCAD used to display windows. This is unaffected by the cut plane height, so even if I change the cut plane to 100 millimeters above the current story, that window is still showing, even though that window starts at 475 from the bottom of the wall. If I put this back to 1150, it still stays the same. So it's purely a symbolic representation of the window that sits in that wall at any height. Next, we're going to change this from symbolic to projected. This will give us from the cut plane down to project 0 in our story, and will only show the window as it appears in the wall. Next window, I'm going to change that to symbolic with overhead, and that should give us a representation of the window from the cut plane down and also all the way to the upper reaches of it. So the whole entire element is being shown through the stories. And then finally, this last window we're going to change to overhead all, and this will just give us some dashed lines, and typically this can be used for overhead windows, so as to remind us that there is a window there. Now as I toggle up through the stories, we can see the symbolic staying the same, cut plane all the way down to project 0, and then the entire element and the symbol still staying the same as well. So the display options for Windows has also been set out in a very logical way. When modelling now, we have to be careful or be aware of where the cutting planes are. For example, if I was to draw a wall that was 3 meters high, remember my stories are 0 to 3 meters, and I'm on the first story. Now I've drawn a wall here with its default setting, the floor plan display on projected and entire element. Now if I tried to draw another wall that was 0 to 500, which is still below the cutting plane, and I draw it right next to the other wall, we can see that it's displayed correctly once again. It's from 0 to 500, but it doesn't have any fill associated with it. Now I'm going to draw another wall. This time we're going to put it at 3 meters, and we're going to put the bottom at 2700 high. Going to draw this wall adjacent to the current wall, and as soon as we click, it disappears. Even when we go to the 3D window, we can't see it. So you might think it's on the story up, but it's not, and it's not on the story below. This can be quite frustrating, and the only way around it is grab the marquee tool, make it a thick marquee which grabs all the stories, select it, go to F4. Now the wall has reappeared. Best thing to do is select it there and then change its view properties to projected with overhead. Push OK, and when we go back to the floor plan, it's correctly displayed once again.